Hello, good evening, and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics, live on Trust TV, your go-to platform for politics, policy, and governance. My name is Abdullahi Ahmed. Tonight, we dive into the uproar over the controversial tax reform bills. The Senate has halted debates and has set up a committee led by Senator Abba Moro to review the proposed legislation. This comes after a wave of public outrage and outright rejection from some critical stakeholders in the country. Since President Ahmed Tinubu presented the bills on November 3rd, the reforms have sparked heated debates both from inside and outside the National Assembly. The bills have raised serious concerns over their potential impact on vulnerable Nigerians and have reignited tensions among Nigeria's federating units over revenue sharing. Joining us tonight to unpack these pressing issues is Sheikh Ahmed Gumi, a prominent Islamic scholar who has some strong opinions about this development, and he's joining us live from Kaduna. Sheikh, good evening to you, and thank you most kindly for joining us on Daily Politics.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Right. Let's set the ball in motion, Sheikh, by listening into the proceedings at the Nigerian Senate today when they made that big decision to concur with what happened in the Green Chamber, where they had indefinitely suspended deliberations about this bill. Let's have a listen to some of the developments from the Nigerian Senate.
With respect to the issues surrounding the tax reform bills, all the areas of disagreement, and resolve them for the interest of this nation. It is therefore proposed that by tomorrow there will be a meeting with the committee that will set up here and the leadership to sit down with the Attorney General to look at those issues and resolve them. It's on this note that the Committee on Finance that the bills have been referred to should halt action on public hearing and other issues until we resolve these issues.
That was Deputy Senate President Senator Jibrin Barrow announcing the suspension on the deliberation of the tax reform bills that are before the Senate. Mind you that the bills have already passed second reading, and the Senate is basically trying to factor in the pushback that is reverberating across several parts of the country. As you can imagine, the talk of town over the past couple of weeks has been the tax reform bills that are due for consideration in the National Assembly. It is by design, according to the federal government, set to modernize and streamline the tax administration in the country. They contain some very influential ideas about tax reforms in concurrence with certain global best practices. However, it has also become a source of controversy. So let's get the thoughts of our guest, Sheikh Ahmed Gumi from Kaduna this evening. Sheikh, you appear to have a rather positive position about these tax reform bills. Why do you support these positions against what has become a popular dissatisfaction, so to say, from northern Nigeria? Why do you stand in contrast with what has become the popular viewpoint of northern stakeholders? Okay, it appears we're struggling with the connection to Sheikh Gumi there, but we're going to work on it so we can get his take, because he is one of those proponents in support of the tax reform bills, and he does hold a rather positive position about what these bills stand to do, even though he did express his reservations about some of the other provisions of this piece of legislation that has caused quite the controversy in Nigeria today. We're going to work on that connection so we can get Sheikh Gumi back into the conversation. I believe we have Sheikh Gumi back, so let's try again. Sheikh, go ahead, please. We lost you. We lost the connection there for a moment. Right, we're going to work on the audio there. Apologies once again, some technical issues that we have to get, a handle over as we try to reestablish our connection to Sheikh Gumi. I don't know if Sheikh Gumi can still hear me, but we're trying to work out the audio there so we can hear your thoughts on this very controversial development that has caught the attention as well as the imagination of Nigerians who are polarized about this development. Is it all good or is it all bad? The conversations as well as the arguments have been quite contrasting, even as the president has, given directives for a review of some of these concerns so that it can factor in some of the counter arguments about the provisions of the bill. And in concurrence with that feeling, the Nigerian Senate has also joined in by suspending its deliberations on the bills, which is supposed to be set for public hearing, which is what's going to come next. I believe we can try again to get across to Sheikh Ahmed Gumi.
The law, but if the taxations are meaningful,
go ahead.
And there is a lot of concession in this government side, and I think there's nothing wrong with having a tax reform in general.
Yeah, Sheikh, apologies for that. You might have to come again because we lost the connection for a moment. So please, let's have your take about why you have such a positive view about this development in light of all of the pushback that is coming from northern Nigeria. Right, we're going to work on that in just a moment. Apologies once again. We're going to take a moment's break to sort out some of the technical challenges we are having with our connection to Sheikh Ahmed Gumi in Kaduna. Join us again in just a moment. All right, welcome back to the program. You're watching Daily Politics. We're just trying to get the conversation underway with Sheikh Ahmed Gumi, who is joining us live in Kaduna to dissect some of the controversies that have shrouded the proposed tax reform bills that are before the National Assembly for consideration. Sheikh, thank you very much for your patience. Let's give it another try. Hopefully this time it will be fluent enough. Just give us your take about your views on the proposed tax reform bills. It is appearing to be quite an unpopular bill in northern Nigeria, or bills in northern Nigeria, with some pushback. Why do you have such a positive view about these tax reform bills?
Yes, you see, northern Nigeria has been suffering from.
Yes, go on, please.
Can I go on? Okay. There's an echo. Okay. Okay, northern Nigeria has been.
Yes, Sheikh, I think you can go ahead. We'll work on.
Northern Nigeria has been suffering from. Okay. So you see, this is a region in part of the country that has been suffering from an economic downturn. Nigeria has, for decades now, industries are down, everything is getting backward, people are getting poorer. More than 60% of Nigerians as a whole are facing a multi-dimensional poverty. So in such a case, any reform, no matter how it is good to have a reform. So the idea of having a reform is a very excellent reform at this material time. But then, as they said, the devil is in the details. We want the details to tally with every aspiration of all segments of Nigerian society, whereby no section of the society or of the country will feel deprived or cheated. This is our calling. We are saying you should not throw away the baby with the bathwater. This is what I was saying.
And apparently the presidency and the National Assembly is reacting to this pushback from the governors, from stakeholders, and from opinion leaders like yourself. What do you make of how the National Assembly is reacting to the voices that are countering the support that this bill has? Right now, the Nigerian Senate has decided to suspend consideration of the bills to try to understand and gauge the temperature of the country. What do you make of their decision right now?
Yes, you see, it's part of good governance that people in charge should go in synergy with the whole population. In fact, even a patient in a hospital, if you want to give him injection, you have to talk to him that, look, we are going to pass you, we are going to do that. You don't just bring a needle and put on a patient like that. So I think what they did is the right thing. But what we are waiting for is the committee that was established to come and look at it critically and see that reforms are formed. Otherwise, we cannot continue with the status quo. The status quo is helping nobody. Here, the situation is getting worse and worse and worse. What I would suggest is that tax is a very strong instrument of economic development, but then if there is overtaxing, multiple taxation, and a great burden on the poor and the weak, as we have today, then development will be delayed.
And what do you make, Sheikh, of the polarization across regional lines? There are a lot of people who feel the North is standing in the way of progress. What do you have to say about the narratives that have been peddled as a result of this legislation that is being considered?
See, the polarization of the matter.
Yes, you see, the polarization of the matter or the politicization of this simple matter, we can understand because the nation is facing an unprecedented economic hardship. So, and there's a lot of suspicion on every segment of the society, of the authority. People don't have faith now. So I think what the government needs to do is to build confidence in people, to know that what it's doing is really genuine. It's not to favor a region or a section of Nigeria against the others, because rumors are going around that this bill is trying to favor a section against the other section. The government needs to do a lot of work to allay this inflamed nerves and this society which is already polarized.
Misinformation and misrepresentation of the facts. And as you can imagine, clerics like yourself, for instance, have joined the conversation. They've been speaking out against some portions of the legislation. What do you think the government can do there to carry everybody along as far as the communication gap is concerned? Because there's also this understanding that people don't necessarily have adequate information about the provisions of these 4 bills that are before the National Assembly.
Intermittent.
Yeah, Sheikh, I don't know if you got the question. The question I was asking is about misinformation and misrepresentation of facts. There are a lot of people who have opinions about what is actually going on right now. Clerics like yourself are weighing in on the conversation, giving their own opinions about it. What do you make of the communication gap? Because you get a sense that there are a lot of people who have something to say about it, but might not necessarily have adequate enough information about the contents of the bill.
You see, now with the explosion of the social media, professionals or what type of organization they believe that. There must be a more organization. And actually, a lot of people who are supposed to be that so I think
Okay. Sheikh, I'm afraid we're going to have to take another quick break because we're struggling with the audio quality there. Please bear with us. And of course, to our viewers also, we're just going to take a moment's break. Daily Politics will be back in just a moment to double down on this ongoing controversial conversations about Nigeria's tax administration. Please join us again. Talk about the hubris of technology. Welcome back to the program. As you're watching Daily Politics live on Trust TV, here's a quick reminder: you can watch us on the go by joining our Facebook and YouTube live stream. Sadly, to inform you that we will be unable to continue our conversation with Sheikh Ahmed Gumi on the proposed tax reform bill and the controversy around it because of our inability to establish connection that will allow us to have that full-blown conversation. But we'll circle back to it in due time as the situation continues to develop. Up next, we talk about the biggest asset seizure in Nigerian history and its continued fight against corruption in the country, as the EFCC has unveiled what many are still trying to digest as far as this development is concerned. Over 700 duplexes or properties as part of an estate in the Federal Capital Territory have been linked to certain individuals, although in some quarters we understand that those properties belong to the embattled immediate past governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. And what that says about our continued fight against corruption and how Nigeria continues to unravel as a result of the mismanagement, the gross mismanagement as well as embezzlement of public funds by public servants, which has become rather endemic. So let's bring in our guest for tonight's conversation, and he's Mr. Salaudeen, who is an all too familiar voice when it comes to the fight against corruption, when it comes to the issues around the polity and so on and so forth. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us in the program. It's good to see you again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right, let's first of all start with your reaction to this development. Considered the biggest asset seizure ever in the history of Nigeria, especially in the context of the fight against corruption. What was your immediate reaction when you came across this news development?
Yeah, I mean, again, it just further goes to confirm the fact that our Commonwealth had been balkanized and, of course, captured by certain individuals, and, of course, not spiritual beings, because they are not in any way invincible. But again, it just further tells us that there is an elite capture of the society, where statecraft has actually been built around our Commonwealth, and a number of individuals have continued to milk. And of course, you create a situation where there is some level of huge disparity. The rich getting extremely very rich, where the poor are getting very, very poor. I mean, not even just poor, but again, getting terribly into that particular line. But again, what readily comes to mind is that we are not surprised. And of course, again, is the fact that there seems to be some already politicking around the seizure. Yes, proceeds of crime we have seen in this country had been taken, and of course, before you realize it, had been relooted again. And that, for me, again, suggests very clearly that every single administration since we returned to democracy had consistently attempted to fight corruption. But again, the more they want to fight corruption, the larger the scale of corruption by their own successors. So it tells you very clearly that the number of people who are waiting to steal in this country are actually bigger than those who are currently stealing. And I find it quite worrisome that we have somebody with huge appetite to have taken that much and put that kind of infrastructure there, when already we have housing deficit within the FCT.
750 duplexes.
Right. And that is not small. Over 150,500 square meters of property. That is what that property is sitting on. And that is actually a huge size. And we are talking about land grabbing, and talking about how this kind of investment has actually altered grazing reserves and movements, and of course create a new layer of problem. Unfortunately, those who do this don't even calculate or measure the risk. But again, this is what politics does.
Yeah, there's a lot of hue and cry about how EFCC is economical with the truth. Like say, for instance, who was the asset seized from? Do you think it matters in the context of the fight against corruption? The idea of naming and shaming people who embezzle the Commonwealth?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you need to build trust. We must build citizens' confidence in the fight against corruption. It is an agenda of the state. You have set up an anti-graft agency saddled with the responsibility to respond, manage, and be able to create a lot of administration around all of these. But again, what we have seen, when you catch a small criminal in the street, you quickly parade. When you catch a Yahoo boy and those who are involved in petty economic crime, I mean, it is very quick to put them into. But again, when you catch the bigwigs, I mean, this is where the matter really lies. What you find again is to make an attempt to find some level of pseudonyms to describe them. The whole case had gone through courts. It was a final forfeiture. So it therefore means that the entire legal process had actually documented those who actually owned those properties, and they were parties to that case before it was eventually finally forfeited. But again, EFCC had shielded them. You cannot in any way fight corruption without exposing those behind.
Is that counterproductive?
It is counterproductive, as a matter of fact. You are going to actually expand trust between citizens and the state. Because already there are insinuations that because you want to protect the perpetrators, that is the only reason why you are not giving their names away. There is something about naming and shaming. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest advocacy by anti-graft crusaders is that, look, you should open a register. When you open a register where the names of those who have been convicted of any form of economic crime can be listed, if not for nothing, because we know that we have a very weak judicial system. But again, if they are listed, tendencies are there that those people are also going to find some level of remorse maybe someday. And perhaps again, it will be on the record. Because we're also Africans. In Africa, there is something they call the culture of shame. When we're growing up, there's something about leaving legacies. In fact, we have the popular saying that good names are better than riches and gold. But people don't talk like that anymore. People believe that when you amass wealth, and it's actually a failure of governance. Failure of governance had driven people into an arena where they consistently want to secure 4 generations ahead of them, forgetting that all of these things also are ephemeral.
And we talk about how the EFCC is struggling to win back public trust or build public confidence, all right, when it comes to the fight against corruption. As you did say, they're working hard to beat the odds when it comes to convincing Nigerians that they're actually for the people on this one. And the chairman of the EFCC has often talked about the hurdles that they have to deal with and how it is almost impossible to go against some of these political heavyweights who have some of these allegations leveled against them. Using this as a case in point, for instance, what more can EFCC do to be much more transparent in its effort to build public trust about the fight against corruption?
I mean, I wonder what the EFCC chairman is trying to reference regarding whether or not they face a lot of hurdle. State capacity. I mean, the student of political science, you all know what state capacity is. You have coercive powers. You have economic power. You have the administrative power. You have a mandate by law to be able to bring those who have been allegedly, indicted into, and you are saying that you are being, you are facing certain hurdles. The fact is that I saw the body language of the former governor of Kogi State when he was actually being taken into custody. And the guy guy kept smiling and waving as if he was in a campaign ground. And I just told myself that two things. One, it is either there is already a conversation that says that, look, this is just some kind of media way of letting people know that at least finally we got you, and we're just going to manage it. Or that in fact the guy knew already that there are already a precedent, that those precedents you cannot in any way negate them, that at the end of the day he's going to let go. We got a case of the former Minister of Aviation who also had incidences. Even his daughter and son-in-law were culpable in the case. They went to court, pleaded not guilty, and at the end of the day, they got a part in it. They got a bail, and of course, they left. Yet in the country where somebody was claimed to have actually committed a case of libel, was moved from Lagos to Ekiti State, and immediately he was arraigned before the court, and he was remanded in prison, and he was actually said to have his case adjourned to December 10th. This is a case where the rule of law is actually different from the rule of the rich. So there is an elite capture of the society. The state capacity is defined at the convenience of those people who have the tendency to make those definitions, and it is on that basis that they determine what is bailable, what is not bailable, what is a crime and what is not crime, what is supposed to be an issue of indictment and what is not. Unfortunately, that is the society we find ourselves.
And when we talk about the narrative that many Nigerians believe is shaping the fight against corruption, the idea that there is some sort of horse trading with the agency about monies that have been embezzled, illicit wealth by people who have been given the opportunity to govern and take charge of government institutions, for instance, that it has become a new norm now where the understanding is that, 100 billion naira is allegedly stolen, and then there's room for some negotiations with the EFCC about how much is going to be given back, and then that sort of deal is now what is being, that is the perception of the public. Do you think when issues like this, for instance, when we show the scale of the asset that has been seized right now, the 750 duplexes in the Federal Capital Territory, do you get a sense that perhaps the person who owns these assets before now is given this as perhaps his way out to secure the other stuff that maybe the public is never going to know about, because that is the deal that the EFCC has
Absolutely.
made?
Of course. I think, again, sometimes people like us have been very stupid to also say that, or to believe that the framers of our laws were quite innocent. So again, we begin to wonder that, okay, I think the framers of our laws were very deliberate. Because when the law, I think the Administration of Criminal Justice had actually provided in the provision for plea bargaining, which suggests that, okay, those who are suspects or who have been caught up in the web can actually negotiate and say, look, so plea bargaining is actually an instrument that every single person who has been culpable lately had actually exploited as an avenue for exit. And so they said, okay, because you do not know how much more has been concealed, and they just tell the states that, okay, this is what we are going to bring, and that will be the case. We saw the case of one time someone who had taken so much more pension fund, and because he just came, negotiated, and they say, okay, bring back this much, and of course takes 750,000 naira as bail, then he gets a pat in the fist and said, this is a precedent. And unfortunately in law, precedent is actually something that you must be very careful with, because it's only a matter of time. It becomes a pattern that every other person exploits. Those who frame the law, introduced plea bargaining, we thought they were only trying to create a modern legal system that will create some level of balancing. But now we know that it is actually an elite clause that was created for purposes of using it as a safeguard, for themselves, because they know that at some point a number of them will be caught in that web. So because it already is existing in the law, then therefore they find it as a window.
So you don't think it's a solution anymore? It's no longer fit for purpose in the grand scheme of things?
Not in any case. It's actually a threat as it is now. Because again, what it therefore means that it makes a mockery of our entire criminal justice system. Because again, there is no punishment for violation, there is no sanction in any way. People only find some level of respite and say, look, worst case scenario, if we take 10, I can give back 1.5, and of course I go smiling with the balance. Unfortunately, it is rather a threat than a safeguard for the criminal justice system.
All right. We're just going to take a quick detour because I understand that we now have a Zoom link to Sheikh Ahmed Gumi to just perhaps put a pin on the conversation that we started with him earlier about the controversial or the controversy around the tax reform bills. Let's speak to Sheikh Ahmed Gumi now, join us virtually from Kaduna via Zoom. Sheikh, thank you once again for your patience and for sticking around. Just recap your thoughts there about what you were trying to say earlier about, the misinformation, misrepresentation of facts that have dominated the conversation across the country, most recently regarding the contents of the tax reform bills.
Me now, what I'm trying to say.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
So what I was trying to say with the explosion of the social media, whereby everybody is an expert in journalism, everybody is an expert in every field of endeavor, you are bound to have this kind of commotion in dealing with the bill. One. And secondly, the government needs to establish credibility with the media. So when in a situation like this, the government needs to do a lot of homework because people were suspicious of the speed by which the bill was presented and read twice and almost getting ready to be passed by the authority. So the speed by which the bill was treated also stirred the suspicion of the citizens. I think where you carry about your things also determines how much outcome you will have. So what I advise the government is to really slow down, get the right people, get right committees to look into it, make sure that every segment of the society agrees with what the content of the bill can present.
Yeah. Sheikh, there are a lot of people who believe this is a teachable moment, especially for the North. We've seen the industries die over the past couple of decades, the ones that have been inherited from the 60s and the 70s. And we've seen this over-reliance on federal allocation, which explains why, to some degree, experts are saying the governors cannot survive if the state governments cannot survive if the new tax policies are being implemented. Do you also think that there's a silver lining here where the North looks into the mirror and says it's time for us to step up so that when it comes to revenue generation, we can also contribute significantly so that when the sharing formula is implemented in this direction, we have nothing to worry about, because then again, we can actually generate for ourselves what we expect to be shared?
Yes, this is just, I think, a natural justice and fairness. You don't expect to get much when you don't produce much. That's by the side. What I'm saying is that the present status quo does not improve the situation here. So we need anything that can trigger people to come and work hard and do the right thing. We have a lot of industries that are packed up. Nobody's investing in them. But I think if there's a stimulus, people will really get down and do the right work and the right thing. I don't mind somebody who produce more to have more. I think it's natural justice. But at the same time, there should be a subvention for underdeveloped regions. A big amount of budget goes to underdeveloped regions, whereby they can develop industries, they can improve their agriculture, and that will compensate for any other thing in which the VAT is not favorable to the areas. It's a package. We can't look at it as an isolation. It is holistic. It should be a holistic in approach. And I think with a lot of explanation from the government and bridges built between people, inshallah, I think it will work.
And what about national unity? Because once again, we've seen how volatile the situation can be. I'm sure you've been tracking some of the commentary online, especially where things can be quite toxic or heated at best, where people have this notion that there are proponents for and against these bills, and it's very clear that most of the northern voices, unlike yours, are against this bill, and therefore it polarizes Nigerians along these religious regional lines. What can we do to have these conversations devoid of these primordial sentiments that have for long plagued Nigeria's polity?
Okay, see, it depends on how the government plays it. The court is in the government's court. It depends on how it presents it. There should be a lot of seminars all over the country. The government should engage the people and tell them the importance of this bill and explain every detail about it. There should not be gray areas. With that, I think it will improve and the argument will die down. But let's not forget, we're in a democracy. So you are bound to hear this kind of voices and opposition. I think it's part of a healthy democracy, which we should also encourage, that people should voice out. I'm happy, really, people voiced out their mind and opposed it, even though I see a lot of good things in it, in which the poor and the small-scale industries have a lot to take from that bill. But it needs still to be dissected more, and the areas that are really offensive should be modified and reviewed so that everybody will be happy.
Right. And finally, Sheikh, before we let you go, what's your timeline here in terms of engagement, in terms of communication, in terms of creating the right awareness? Because we see what's happening in the National Assembly. The House of Representatives is, very clear about indefinitely suspending it. They're quite being harsh about it. The Senate, just earlier today, also decided to set up this committee to look into areas of engagement so the stakeholders' viewpoints can also be taken. But also, we're dealing with time here because the administration also needs these bills so that it can implement next year's budget in accordance with some of these tax policies. And we're already in December. What do you make of how much time we need to deliberate on some of these issues and how much time we cannot afford to waste on some of these deliberations because we're running against time?
Yes, I think what we need really have experts, experts in economy, experts in budgetary formulation and other things, really to come out and speak. We should not allow laymen in this field to be talking on sentiments and also politicizing a very important segment of our life, because economy is very important. What I think the Senate needs to do, they should not just put it under the carpet. They should not throw away I've said many several times, throw away the baby with the bath water. They should act quickly. The Federal House of Assembly should also act quickly and explain to people the details about all this, what it entails, or even let the contentious part remain as it is, then we carry on with the rest. Because there's a lot of package for the poor and the small-scale industries, which I don't want it to be thrown away.
Right. Well, Sheikh Ahmed Gumi, thank you most kindly for your patience, but above all, thank you so much for your insight on this particular.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure anytime.
We really appreciate you for joining us tonight on Daily Politics. Sheikh Ahmed Gumi, they join us virtually from Kaduna to add value to the conversation around the controversy of the much talked about tax reform bills. Here in the studio, we've been speaking with an anti-corruption voice, Dr. Salaudeen Hashim, Program Director at Clean Foundation. Let's segue into it because we just have a minute or two to spare. But I'd love to get your take on this particular conversation, the controversy around the tax reform bills and how it is impacting the polity right now. Looking at what's happening, where do you stand on the rhetorics, the narrative that has been peddled, and the heart of the conversation?
Fundamentally, every law has a process that it must undertake, and one of the critical elements around it is the public hearing, and I've not seen that happen in the whole process. Two is the fact that there seems to be some level of politicization around it. The level at which, just like Sheikh had mentioned, the haste behind it also throws up a number of suspicion. And typically, look, if we we had a very honest and sincere government successively, perhaps people won't even bother and feel that, okay, whatever government comes with is in the interest of the state. But I can tell you, just like people who go to the market, they tell you that there are hidden charges. I think there are hidden charges, the haste, the hush, and the way a number of people are quick to support, and there must be a process. That process, if not exhausted, we shouldn't say that there is some level of, it should go through that. I expect some level of regional consultation around this. There should be constituency level consultation. There should be some level of public hearing where people will come, do some analysis, present it to them. What are the gains? What are the deficits? What are the level of prospect that comes with it? People understand it. Then, of course, you build a consensus. And, of course, you would even go with every form of clear conscience, to make those presentations. And that is where it is always said, those who come to equity must always come with clean hands.
And away from the chaos and the controversy, do you think this is also a teachable moment where we learn to deliberate and have an all-inclusive process that allows every aspect of our country, every aspect of the economy to contribute, especially to fundamental legislation such as tax management, for instance?
That is the beauty of democracy, participation. You must be able to add your voice. You must be able to contribute to the process. You must engage. And one of the beauty of what I like with what is happening is that it is actually exemplary of the fact that we are in a democratic system where government within itself are not agreeing on specific issues, whether it is politics. I mean, let us leave out those primordial issues. But the most important thing is that there is engagement, there is participation, there is inclusion. And then, of course, at some point, the citadel of democracy, which is the National Assembly, are coming to say, look, we can therefore go back to see. Unfortunately for me, is the fact that when it matters most, we don't see this kind of engagement happening in the parliament. But again, when it's an issue that touches directly on some level of sentimentality, that is where you see this kind of, I hope on every single thing. The budget, for instance. I would expect to see this kind of contention on the budget presentation. But again, I hope that will happen, but you are likely not going to see that.
Right. Well, what about the governors, for instance, and how they're very emphatic about their displeasure on regards to some of the contents or proposals in the bill, for instance? What do you make of their position, and how citizens are saying, well, listen, we have not really seen a justification for all the funds that you've been receiving now, so we don't really empathize with you when you talk about how this is going to make things rather difficult for you going forward? What do you make of their contribution to the argument so far?
The governors don't have any moral justification, and that is the clear fact. Because to be very honest, they have received much more, even after subsidy. I had expected that by now, one of the things that you see the federal government would be wondering is that the level of agitation around the subsidy shouldn't be this much. Because post-subsidy, governors have received almost twice the amount, and it is expected that they will create safeguard in their own state, but they are not doing so. What I want to say at this point is that private sector have a role to play, particularly in the north, to be able to use the natural resources, animal husbandry, to create and industrialize. Go to Kaduna South, you will find a number of industries, Finetex, Nortex, UNTL, all of these companies are vast and they have a lot of potential. Right. They need to go back and resuscitate.
Dr. Salaudeen, Hashim, as always, thank you so much for your insight. We really do appreciate you for stopping by on Daily Politics.
Thank you very much
so much for the insight and expert analysis. Well, that's our show for you tonight. Thank you most kindly for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow, live and exclusive as always on Trust TV. Until then, it's goodbye from me, Abdullahi, Ahmed, and the rest of the team. We will see you soon.